Hi, everyone. Welcome to our September 10th community conversation. My name is Hillary Hightower. I am the Director of Prevention, Education, and Awareness at Denton County Friends of the Family. And I have two of my friends and colleagues with me today to talk to you about our Survivors Advocacy team. So first, we have Stephanie Hunnicutt, who was one of our community resource coordinators. And secondly, I have Deja Pink, who is our SAT coordinator, or the Survivor Advocacy Team coordinator. And I will let them introduce themselves to you and tell you all a little bit more about their specific job before we dive in today.
Hi, so I'm Stephanie Hunnicutt. I'm the Community Resource Coordinator over volunteer and intern services here at Denton County Friends of the Family. So anytime you are interested in becoming a volunteer and volunteering with our agency or becoming an intern, I am the point of contact for our agency. So any applications that come through, inquiries, questions, opportunities, projects, that kind of stuff, I'm the first stop before we move on to other directors or coordinators. Like Deja.
And I'm Deja Pink. I go a little bit beyond what Stephanie does. It's still recruiting volunteers and things like that, but we take it a step further with SAT. We provide more training 3 times a year, and we recruit volunteers. We provide community education, and I make schedules and things like that. So it's a little bit further than what Stephanie does as far as being specific to my program.
So before we totally jump in, Deja, can you tell us a little bit about what SAT is? And then Stephanie, I'm going to pivot back to you and ask some specific questions about volunteerism. But Deja, tell us a little bit about SAT.
Sure. So SAT is the Survivor Advocacy Team, and what it is community volunteers. We also have interns and staff who are a part of the team as well. And what we do is we respond to emergency calls of domestic violence and sexual assault. And that's something specifically I want to point out because a lot of people think that this team is just for survivors of sexual assault. And that's actually something I didn't even learn until I was hired, that it was for domestic violence too. And so we respond to 4 hospitals: Medical City, Denton, Texas Health Presbyterian, Medical City, Flower Mound, and Carrollton Regional. And when someone makes a report of domestic or sexual violence, they are taken to the hospital if they choose to do so, and they can get their SANE exam done if they want to. And we are there to just be a supportive presence for them, provide advocacy and resources.
And Deja, a SANE exam is, in lay people's terms, right, is like a rape kit, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And for domestic violence victims, they might not necessarily need the sexual assault type of SANE exam, but they could still receive a SANE exam to have wounds swabbed or DNA collected, correct?
Definitely, yes.
Okay. So SAT, oftentimes people think is like a really intense volunteer opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. But Stephanie, talk to us about, so Deja mentioned that people will go through SAT training, and that's really the purpose of our community conversation today, is to talk a little more in detail about what SAT training is. But sometimes volunteers say, well, why do I have to go through volunteer training or volunteer orientation and then do SAT training? Can you speak to us about that, Stephanie?
Yeah. So all of our volunteers, including all of our volunteers who are going to be working with our agency, go through a 2-hour training on the days that we have available during the month. So this 2-hour training is just an in-depth training on the history of our organization, the history of the battered women's movement, the history of how domestic violence agencies in the state of Texas came to be. It's an in-depth on legal and laws that have been passed, different acts that we do, and then an overview of opportunities that we have available and how to become an active volunteer within our agency. So the reason we start off with this 2-hour is what we're covering in this 2-hour is not covered during the SAT training. The SAT training is going to go more in depth of what the specific task is that you're going to be doing as that volunteer. This is just a general overview of all the volunteer opportunities that we have available, and a small little, hey, become a SAT volunteer in it as well. So it's just a basic overview of what our agency does and who we are, and the importance of knowing like statistics and how to get involved, how to be an advocate. Once you're a volunteer, you become kind of a community advocate for our agency as it is, or an ambassador if you want. So you get to know all this information that you might not have known beforehand. So it's a good little way to learn more about our agency.
Yeah, it's building a foundation of whatever volunteer activity someone might move toward as they shift into a different type of place in the agency. And a lot of the things that Stephanie named are also, because we're a grant funded agency, a lot of the things that Stephanie mentioned are requirements by grants to make sure that anyone who's volunteering within our agency has some very specific training on specific things, or at least a foundation or a baseline knowledge that we can work from as they move into different departments. So Deja, you talked to us a little bit about what SAT is, but what does being an actual SAT volunteer entail?
So what it would entail and what it would take to become a SAT volunteer is for someone to go to the DCFOF website and to go to the SAT page and apply. You have to apply 2 places, to be a volunteer and to be a SAT. And both of those will go to Stephanie, and she will screen the applicant. So you have to apply, you have to be screened, you have to go to volunteer orientation, and you have to pass a background check. Once all of those things are complete, then someone could reach out to me and let me know, or Stephanie would let me know that someone has completed orientation and screening, and I would reach out to them, or vice versa, about being interested in SAT. If they're interested in SAT, we only have training 3 times a year, so it depends on what time of year we're in. As of now, the next training is starting October 3rd, and someone will reach out to me, let me know they're interested, and I can get them signed up for SAT training. One thing I've liked to do recently is like try to meet face-to-face before SAT training comes up. So if anyone is interested and would like to set up a Zoom meeting to talk about SAT or anything further, I'm more than happy to do that. So once you're actually a SAT, you have to attend training, and then you have to shadow a couple of calls. And what that looks like, well, I guess, Hillary, we might get into that a little bit later, but you basically go into the hospital and you are just there to support them, and you make sure to offer choices and basically be there for whatever the survivor victim needs.
Thanks, Deja. So I'm guessing that being a SAT is something that we provide 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to the community. And so when someone is a SAT, do they get to schedule themselves, or is the schedule provided to them?
Yeah, so one thing we try to do, which things are very unsure right now, but we try to ask everyone to commit for at least 6 months. I understand that that's not always a possibility, but we try to at least ask for a 6-month commitment. Someone can let me know their availability, and then I will schedule them according to that availability and everyone else's. So yeah, and you kind of can make your own schedule, but it will be based off what everybody else's availability is. So yes, it's very flexible. If you schedule yourself for a weekend and you're like, oh, hey, sorry, I forgot I had this plan. I would, of course, remind you that you did sign up for that time and it requires a commitment, but at the same time, I understand things happen. So we would just make those needed changes to the schedule.
It's very similar to what we do with our just general volunteers too. You get to schedule yourself. It's kind of part of our core belief is that you get the choice to make those decisions, and it's empowering to be able to say, this is when I'm available, this is when I want to be able to help. And so you have that within SAT as well. So if you know you're available from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. every day, and that's when you want to volunteer, that's when you would say, hey, Deja, this is when I'm available, and this is when you can sign me up. And so she'll then block you off in her calendar to make sure to reach out to you and let you know that's when you're available.
Yeah, and one of the neat things I know, Deja, about SAT is that there is the ability to volunteer 24 hours a day. And so some people feel like, oh, I don't really have time to volunteer because I work all day, or I'm in school and my class schedule is sporadic. And so there is the option to sign up overnight or on weekends, which I think is a really unique and neat part of becoming a SAT volunteer.
I'd also like to say that just because you're on call doesn't mean you're actually going to get a call.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's that too.
Deja, or Stephanie, can anyone be a SAT?
Yes. Anyone that is interested, who is already a volunteer with our agency, who's been through the background check and the training, can be a SAT volunteer. It doesn't matter your background training. You don't have to be a specialized counselor or anything like that. You could be a tax writer or something like that, I don't know, and have the heart to be a volunteer on our SAT team and become one.
Yeah, so Deja, I know that as you have talked to people and try to recruit folks for this, sometimes that's a question that comes up, as people seem really intimidated by SAT, or they worry that they don't have proper prior training. And so everyone who's with us, Stephanie just told you, you don't have to have any previous training. That's what we're here to talk about, is that training, and that we will teach you what you need to know.
Yes.
Deja, in what ways could someone benefit from being a SAT volunteer?
Well, there's a lot of ways, I think, of course I'm biased, that someone could benefit from being a SAT volunteer. One, it's something great to add to your resume, that you've had this experience, because it's very unique. Like, of course, the work we do is very unique and to a special population. So it's something you can't find everywhere, or something you can do everywhere. So that's something to add to your resume. Like Hillary said, we will give you all the tools you need to work with a trauma-informed lens, to work with victim survivors of trauma, specifically sexual and domestic trauma. And you get to meet people who have had different experiences than you, whether you are a survivor or not. Having exposure to this can allow you to be more empathetic. There's so many benefits. It's flexible hours. You get to meet a lot of great people. You have a whole team behind you wanting to support you in anything you need. So there's a plethora of benefits.
Yeah, we have a lot of different types of volunteers on the SAT team. So we have, I know one person who is a pre-med student working on undergrad right now, and chose to become a SAT because he figured one day when he becomes a physician, or in whatever field he's in, that this would be beneficial for him. We have a couple of people who are LPC interns working on their licensure hours. And so being a SAT allows them to count time met with a client toward their licensure hours, which is super helpful for them. Some folks are just community members who have, like Deja said, have it in their heart to want to help someone or volunteer. So there is certainly no requirement of you have to have done this previously to do this. And I think that is also what makes that a unique team that Deja has under her, is all of these folks with different jobs that they, in different backgrounds, because it is definitely a unique experience to get them all in one place, which I know is hard right now because of COVID. So sometimes it's Zoomed in one place, and hopefully we'll have some Zoom SAT meetings. I know she's been mostly meeting with folks individually because via Zoom. But Deja, can you walk us through what getting a SAT call would be like?
Yeah, so depending on who's on call at the moment. So usually how it works is it's the frontline SAT, which is usually the community volunteers. And then we have backup, interns, and then staff. So whoever is the frontline would be the first person to be called in a SAT call. So it would look kind of like a domestic violence or sexual assault call. Victim survivor calls 911 or the police, and then the police would call the crisis line and let them know, like, hey, I have a 20-year-old victim of, let's say, sexual assault, and we're en route to, let's say, Medical City, Denton, and how it depends on whether or not the person is needing emergency medical attention at the moment. So they would usually go to the hospital, and while they're en route, they would call the crisis line, give the crisis line the case number, the victim's age, sex, and then they would give them all the information they needed to the crisis line, and the crisis line would call, they would dispatch a SANE nurse first, and then they would dispatch a SAT volunteer. And they would give the SAT volunteer the very minimal information they need, but still enough to get you into the hospital and the information that you need, which would probably be the person's name, their age, their sex. And then you would go, the SAT would be dispatched, and they would have to get there. Well, we recommend they get there within an hour. And then they go to the hospital, they check in with the front desk at the emergency room, they get a face sheet, and then they go back to the room. It's different for every call, but the ones that I've been on personally, I just walked in, I introduced myself, I asked if they wanted me there with them. If they say yes, then I would just go, and we would just go from there, however the victim survivor is feeling. But most of the time they're alone, but sometimes they have family members, sometimes it may be a child. So it's just, it could vary in a lot of different ways, but that's pretty much how it goes.
Thank you. Deja, do we respond? So I heard you mention like the survivor could be a child. We respond to victims of any age.
Yes.
And what supplies would a SAT volunteer have with them that they would be like carrying as someone on call?
Yeah, so usually we give everyone a bag. We call it a SAT bag. And what it usually has is a couple of teddy bears. We like to give teddy bears because when someone's experiencing a traumatic event, it just helps a lot most of the time for someone to like hold something warm and soft. So it doesn't matter how old they are, how young they are, we will still offer it because there's give options. And so it'll be a couple of teddy bears. It will be informational packets from friends of the family, state resources, community resources that can help them after they leave the hospital. We let them know that we're an option if they want to schedule an intake with us. I would follow up. And then they also have clean new underwear, clean new pants, shirts that they could change into if they would like. So all of those things are bought new. We don't give donated clothes or anything like that to the victims.
So pretty much anything that you would want if you wanted to be clean and your clothes were maybe taken as evidence as part of your exam, and then information to have help afterward.
Definitely.
And I definitely want to say something real quick on those items. For anyone who's watching, if you want to donate some brand new with tags still on them, teddy bears, clothing items, underwear, socks, that kind of stuff, those are always needed items, even duffel bags that we can give to our volunteers. Those are items that we definitely need, and we'd be more than welcome and happy to accept them. Even sports bras, still brand new, tag on them kind of stuff. And when we look for sizes, we're looking usually for the bigger sizes for the most part. So large, extra large, that kind of stuff, just to make sure it fits everybody.
Yeah. And we take donations of all sizes. So, you know, kids socks, adult socks, but Stephanie's absolutely right. We would much rather be in the hospital with an adult victim who's a size medium and give them an extra large sweatshirt than for us to be in there and have a victim who needed an extra large sweatshirt and all we had was medium. And so we do certainly prefer sizes that can fit lots of people. And we also, in our bags, we do keep kids clothes and kids underwear and kids socks as well. And so we certainly try to have everything available. And then of course, after the fact, the police departments and officers who have responded to those most of the time for those child calls are going to get them linked in with one of our great partners in the community, the Denton County Children's Advocacy Center, and kiddos would be seen there most likely. Let me look at my other questions I wanted to ask y'all. So Deja, you mentioned that we ask for a 6-month time commitment overall for SAT volunteers. Is there a time commitment we ask for them each month?
We try to ask for at least a 20-hour minimum a month, but like I said, things are so uncertain right now. Things are changing daily. So we honestly just take what we can get from people. So whatever you can volunteer, we would love to have you.
Deja, I know that COVID has put like a real big kink in our SAT plans and in a lot of plans in general. It has changed. I mean, we're doing this via Zoom instead of in person because of COVID-19. And so, you know, as someone who has been in communication with the hospitals, I know currently they are not letting in visitors to our Denton County hospitals. And actually, I know you mentioned Medical City Flower Mound is one of the hospitals, and I believe it is still closed because they have sent their employees over to Medical City Louisville to work because of COVID-19. And so how are you handling, or what does that look like because of COVID-19?
Yeah, so right now, during the kind of downtime, I've just been working on recruiting people for the October training, and hopefully in the next coming weeks, we are able to implement iPads in the 2 sane rooms that we have up and running right now. Like Hillary said, a couple of the hospitals are closed and not accepting volunteers. But so what it would look like is we would have iPads in each of the hospital rooms, and we plan to use the DocsMe platform. It is HIPAA secure, and it's slightly different from Zoom. But what we plan to do is have virtual meeting rooms on each of the iPads for each individual hospital. And after someone got their exam, if they chose to or not, while they're waiting on their medications and things like that, we plan to meet with the victim survivor while they're waiting on the next step after their exam. So we're still trying to get it implemented. It's still in the works, but that's our plan in the coming weeks, is to start doing it virtually, because we haven't been meeting with people since about March, I believe. So.
Yeah, so currently what we've been doing is, as the police officers are calling the crisis line, we are like fingers crossed and hoping that in that moment of crisis for them and the survivor, that they can give the crisis line worker a good phone number or email address for survivors. And we've been following up with them via phone. And so our vision that's amazing, and I'm ready for it to happen, is this iPad Hope in the sane rooms at the hospital. And so when the sane nurses are finished, that we will be able to at least have some face-to-face contact with these survivors in the moment to let them know about our services, and hopefully let them know that they're just not alone in the world out there, even though things feel even more isolating right now because of COVID-19. And the vision will be, I think, as Deja, correct me if I'm wrong, while we work out all of the plans with the iPads, that the Prevention, Education, and Awareness Program team will be the folks on call first. And as we get it all worked out, then our frontline volunteers will start to get to come back on call.
Definitely. We don't want to frustrate anybody. We'd rather be the ones to deal with everything first. And then when we have everything worked out, then we'll give the responsibility over to the front lines. But just to keep everything cool, we'll go ahead and start it off.
So Deja, you mentioned a couple of times about SAT training coming up, and I want you to talk a little bit about what all SAT training entails.
Yeah, so it's a lot of different topics. We kind of start off with like an overview of what SAT is, what the commitment would be, and things like that. And what it is like a 30-ish hour training in classroom, and then you're supposed to do 10 hours of training outside of the classroom, which is about 2 SAT calls. And so we have training on weeknights in the evening from about 6 to 9. And then we have, this year, we're going to do a couple of Saturdays, like 3 Saturdays. And so we start off with talking about SAT and what that type of trauma would look like. And then we go deeper into different topics, such as like domestic violence in African American communities, what domestic and sexual violence looks like in Latinx and Hispanic communities. And then we just go deeper into like dealing with children. We go into human trafficking, child victims. We also talk about, we also have someone come talk about the SANE exam. We usually have a SANE nurse come and give details about the SANE exam, what it entails, what the SANE kit entails. And then we also talk about like processing, like set paperwork, what goes on after the call, as far as like administrative things. So it starts off kind of general, and then it winds down into different topics, and then we talk about admin, and then we're pretty much done after that. But it's this year is going to be about 33 hours of in-class.
And this year, the in-class portion is going to be done via Zoom, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so just because at our facility, there's not a way really for everybody who would want to be interested in attend that training to socially distance and have it be effective for everyone. So we'll be doing that via Zoom for the first time. And so excited about that opportunity. Our new workers institutes, we've done 2 of them via Zoom so far, and they have seemed successful, and we've all survived at least. So can someone be a SAT even if they don't live in Denton County, Deja or Stephanie?
Yes. We have a few people on the SAT team currently who live in like Fort Worth, on that like the outskirts of Denton, but especially since we're virtual now, I don't see why we couldn't have anybody really join SAT.
Good point.
Yeah, definitely. There is probably a little bit more driving involved than when we start going back to the hospitals.
Yeah,
but,
and typically what we say about the driving part is, like Deja mentioned, as long as you could be there within about an hour. And so for folks who live far away, if you got a call during traffic time, that wouldn't, you might not could get there in an hour. And so that would certainly be something to consider. We had a question come through that said, are clothes and teddy bears available to victims even when we're doing virtual calls? And yes, I believe Deja has taken some clothes and teddy bears to the SANE nurses that they're keeping in those exam rooms.
Right.
And we'll continue to do that as those get used up. They don't have a whole lot of storage in those spaces, and so I imagine we'll be having to do that more frequently than
I think our internet is cutting out.
Yeah, Steph, you're frozen, but Deja's not. But I could hear you. Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone.
Not that great at the moment. I'm sorry. So could you guys say that one more time, please? Because it went all robot.
Yes. So the clothes and teddy bears are available even while we're doing virtual calls. Deja has dropped off packets and clothing and teddy bears with the SANE nurses that they will be keeping in the SANE exam rooms for right now. They don't have a lot of storage in those spaces, so there's not a lot that they have all at once, but we'll just continue to supply those to them as needed.
Yeah.
Stephanie, have other questions come in through?
Yes, I think so. Let's see, just a second.
Deja, I have one for you that I'll ask while Stephanie's going through the chat. So if I had 1 hour to spare, would that be useful for me to sign up, or is it better to sign up in more larger blocks of time?
As much as I would like to say yes, like the way SAT works, an hour wouldn't really be useful because the calls can go for hours. So if you just say you're available, like let's say on your lunch break, 12 to 1, and you get a call at 12:30, then like you're gonna have to be at the hospital for maybe until 4. Like it could go 5 hours. You just never know how long it will go. So as much as I would like to say yes, no, that's why we ask for a minimum of about 20 hours a month, so that if you're on call, you're able to respond and be there if you're needed.
And you can like block those together.
Yes.
Yeah. So I know even as we move doing this virtually, an hour still wouldn't, like, although helpful, and we hate to say like we don't want you to help us, there might be another volunteer opportunity to do if you only have 1 hour a week to spare. But even the doing it virtually, an hour would be a tight turnaround, just so you wouldn't feel like you were rushing the survivor as you're speaking to them. And the average SAT call, typically, like the actual time spent with their survivor on average is just about like an hour and a half. But the drive time to get there, the time spent talking to the crisis line worker, doing the paperwork at the end, sometimes we'll push that to the 3 hour time frame because of the time it takes to like take everything in, get yourself ready, drive to the hospital, get checked in, all of that. And so we certainly recommend that when you're signing up to be on call, that you're doing that in at least 4 hour blocks, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. And I know all the calls that I've been on a few, and I was there a minimum of 3 or 4 hours. It really just depends on what the victim survivor wants. If they may want you to even go on the exam with them, you just never know what's going to happen when you get to the hospital. So you just have to make sure you have at least a few hours blocked out so that you can be there.
Absolutely. Deja, what things would you want folks watching to know about SAT or SAT training that we haven't covered?
I think, like you said, people are kind of scared, or they kind of shy away from SAT because they think they have to have all these skills. Of course, it would help if you had skills. Like, I have a background in social work. A lot of our SATs have backgrounds in counseling, but you don't have to have all of those skills in your toolbox to be a SAT. We are going to provide you with all the tools you need. And like I said, there's a whole team of people behind you. Like the P team, we're great with being available. There's always the crisis line. If you have an answer, if you have a question, you need to answer immediately. So there's all these resources available to anyone who's wanting to be a SAT. You don't have to be the perfect counselor or anything like that to be a part of the SAT team. Like, we're going to give you all the tools you need. As long as you pass your background check and things like that, we'll give you everything you need to be successful. Another important thing to know, like if you're interested in SAT, is you have to kind of leave your things at the door. You have to leave your personal beliefs at the door, because you don't want to bring that into the room. When you're with the victim survivor, you don't want to push your own beliefs on them. You're really just there to be with them while they're going through this traumatic experience. If you want to pray before you get there, that's your business, but don't be like, can I pray for you? Like, that can be very uncomfortable for some people. So you just have to kind of leave your personal things at the door and just be there for what they need. You have to know it's like, it's not about you, it's about them, and I'm here for them. So
yeah, it's in that way that sort of like stepping into that very selflessly is a lot like things that social workers or counselors do when they're working with clients, which is really checking your own beliefs and not bringing that into essentially for them like a therapeutic space. And we would consider this, like a sacred and special space that we don't want to press our views. And we're there to help and to be supportive for survivors. And that's the main thing is, especially if someone is coming into the hospital alone. We want to make sure that someone isn't alone. And then really the key is getting them linked in and connected to services after the fact so that they don't have to continue to be alone. Deja, if I responded to a SAT call and there were friends or family there, are Friends of the Family services available to those folks as well?
Yes, so Friends of the Family serves primary and secondary victims of domestic and sexual violence. So a secondary victim can be anyone. It could be a friend, it could be a coworker, a mom, a dad, a sister's brother. Like, it could be anyone who could be impacted by your personal trauma. So if anyone, like a coworker, is very traumatized by what happened to you as their coworker, they can receive victim services from friends of the family. So yeah, any primary or secondary victim of domestic or sexual violence, we can help.
So one of the questions that came in was, has the number of cases or SAT calls that we've received dropped in Denton County? And from what we've seen, the SAT numbers have not dropped. They've been pretty consistent with our 2019 numbers.
Yeah, and I just actually left the hospital talking to one of the head SANE nurses, and she was telling me like over the weekend they were very, very busy. So like that's just something we know, holidays and things like that, when people are together, things like this tend to happen and we have to respond. So she was saying that they were very busy over the holiday weekend, unfortunately.
Yeah, so we'll have some follow-up calls to make this week for sure.
I think that's it on the questions that we've had come through. Okay. But real quick, I just want to say SANE does stand for something. So sexual assault nurse examiner, if anyone's curious about that definition. And then also in the comments, we will have how you can go and find our website to register and apply to be a volunteer and a SAT volunteer.
Stephanie, will you have in the comments, will you have them also put, I think there's a really neat video that you did at the beginning of COVID where you interviewed some current SAT volunteers. Will you have them put the link to that there as well?
We'll put that YouTube link in there for sure. So yeah, that's another great resource. Is back in April, before Deja started, we had three SAT volunteers. And one of them is a male, so it lets you know that men can also be SAT volunteers. We want anybody and everybody to be a SAT volunteer, no matter the gender you identify as. So with that, it gives you a little insight of what the SAT process is like, what it's like to be a SAT volunteer, and just firsthand experience from our long-term SAT volunteers. We have one who's a newer SAT volunteer and then some that are been around for a few years. So it's a great resource. We will put that link into our comments so that you guys can go find that video and watch it. It's about 35 minutes long, but it's a good resource and it's a good way to see from some actual SAT volunteers what it's like, who you'd be joining the team with, for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a longer version of walk me through a SAT call, right?
It really is. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I am grateful to both of you for being here to talk about this. And of course, one of our main reasons for hopping on today for this being the community conversation is we want folks who are listening to share this content with other people, because we are looking to increase our SAT volunteers. Deja needs to have some fresh folks join the team. We're always looking for volunteers. There can never be too many SAT volunteers, period. There cannot be. And so we are hopeful that folks will attend volunteer orientation in the next coming weeks and then be able to jump into SAT training in October. We'd be so delighted for you to join us in doing that. And I know Deja is really excited to have our first SAT training for the fall, for her first SAT training as the SAT coordinator, not our first of the year, but her first in this role. And so we are hopeful that folks will share this, even if you're someone who can't commit to the time right now, you've got to know at least 2 people who could. And so the best way we get volunteers is word of mouth and sharing on social media. And so please, please, please help us in our recruitment efforts.
Yeah, and I will say our next volunteer orientations that are coming up are Saturday, September 19th from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. And then I think it's October 2nd. I don't remember which day that is. It's during the week. I think it might be like might be like a Thursday. I'm like, oh, hold on. Actually, I can find out. It's a Friday.
It's October 1st. No, October 2nd. Yeah, Friday.
Yeah, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. All of our volunteer orientations are currently via Zoom. They are virtual as well. So if you're interested and you want to become a SAT volunteer, those are the 2 volunteer orientation dates coming up. And for future reference, if let's say you don't have time to attend one of the SAT trainings, but there's a SAT training coming up, or no, I'm sorry. If you can't attend a volunteer orientation, but there's a volunteer orientation taking place during a SAT training, you can attend that orientation alongside SAT training, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Yes.
And so, as Deja mentioned, we're not really interested in creating barriers for people to become SATs. And so, even if you pass this information along to someone and they contact us in November and say, I want to become a SAT, we will figure out a way to get you trained and on the SAT team prior to the next SAT training, which will be in the spring. It is just much easier for everybody involved, particularly for the volunteers, to be able to do it in groups so that you kind of have a cohort of volunteers that you go through training with to lean on one another as you go through this. But absolutely, we are not interested in creating barriers to folks becoming SAT volunteers. So we will do as much as we can to make it work.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank y'all so much. And we hope you have a great Thursday.
See you guys at SAT soon.